humor, science fiction, horror, and an imaginative retelling of an American classic. If you're looking for something interesting to read to close out the summer, I've got a book for you. Hey everybody, welcome back to D3 Reads. If you watched some of our earlier videos, you know that typically our videos are thematic. We've got videos on best science fiction, best horror authors, best military science fiction, etc., etc. But probably like most of you, I just like to read. And sometimes I see something that looks great and I cram it into my TBR and try to read it as I can, even though it doesn't fit in some of the planned videos that we're doing here. Plus, I've decided to challenge myself to read some more recently published books. A lot of the books I've been reading lately have either been rereading some classics or going back and reading some of the classic books of the last few decades that I never got around to. But by focusing on these older books, I'm missing out and falling behind on a lot of really good recently published material. So when I can, I've been making time to read some more recently published stuff, and some of these books have been really, really good. So I wanted to share them with you. But first, we've hit over 300 subscribers. I can't tell you how excited we are about that. I mean, it just seems like I was thanking you all for hitting 200 subscribers. Every comment, every subscription, every like that you do, we are extremely grateful for. We thank you so much for that. And one of the things I'm really grateful for is whenever anybody drops in a comment or suggestion for a book that either I wasn't tracking or that maybe I forgot about and I've been meaning to get to. So thank you so much, but you're not just helping me. There are a number of times I've seen where somebody has read one of your comments and mentioned how they have to go now and check out these books. So thank you so much for sharing your favorites. And on that note, as we dive in, what are you reading this summer? What are the books that have either been unexpectedly great or unexpectedly disappointing? We're always interested to find out what books are firing on all cylinders. So please drop a comment, let us know what you're reading this summer. So with that, let's jump right in. The first book we're going to cover is Swamp Story, published in 2023 and written by Dave Barry. Now, Dave is one of my absolute favorite writers. I have been reading his books since the 1980s, actually, when he was a humor writer at the Miami Herald. He had a regular column that would appear there and it would be syndicated, but his books often collected his writings and put them into collections, and I would read those, always hilarious. And other times he would publish books that were observational humor, like how to be a parent or how to deal with emerging technology, his trip to Japan, that kind of thing. And every single one of his books, I think I've read pretty much all of his books. In 1999, he published his first actual novel, which was called Big Trouble. It was a great book in its own right, but you may have seen the movie rendition of it starring Tim Allen and Renee Russell. And since then, he's been publishing quite a few novels. His latest is Swamp Story. Now, this one became an instant favorite of mine because I got to meet Dave Barry at a book signing earlier this year. So I have my signed copy of Swamp Story. Like I said, I've grown up reading him, and so I was very excited about that. But I hadn't had a chance to actually read the book until recently, and I'll tell you, it was great. It's classic Dave Barry. If you've read any of his novels, he's pretty much lived most of his adult life in the state of Florida, and his books often reflect the craziness that is living in Florida. I lived there for 3 years myself at one point. Now, Swamp Story can be summed up this way. Take the essence of what you know of Florida Man, all the craziness associated with that term, and then turn it into a novel. It's a whirlwind of absurd situations that all orbit around a central plot. In this case, the main character is a woman named Jessie, who lives in the Everglades with her deadbeat boyfriend and their infant child. Jessie would love nothing more than to leave this life behind, but she has no job, she doesn't have any prospects. It all changes, however, when she, on some just random walk, when she happens to stumble across this buried treasure that had been hidden in the swamp since the time of the Civil War. Now, Jessie has a chance to live her dreams and to escape this life. However, rumors of this buried treasure had been around for over 100 years, and it turns out there's some pretty seedy other characters who have been looking for it, and they figure out that Jessie knows where the gold is, and they are in pursuit. So by the end of this book, there are a number of parties that are all looking for this gold, total chaos, but there's a secondary storyline that's going on that's absolutely hilarious, and it revolves around something called the Everglades Melon Monster. One of the characters owns a rundown bait and beer shop, and he comes up with this idea of the melon monster, which is supposed to be this creature on par with Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster and just as ethereal as those two. The idea to use social media to share some grainy footage and maybe create a social media sensation, a viral sensation that will draw customers to this bait and beer shop looking for this melon monster, and it works. And so a lot of the laugh out loud moments of this book come from this parallel plot as they're trying to develop this. That's kind of all happening while Jessie is in this more serious predicament of being pursued by goons who want this treasure that she's found. And there's a lot more going on too. There's so many moving parts that you kind of feel lost at some points, but Dave does this masterful job of bringing it all to a head and finishing up the story. I loved it. Dave is just, again, one of my favorite authors, and I rate this book 4 stars out of 5. So if you're looking for something fun to read for this summer, check out Swamp Story. Now, if you're looking for something a little bit more science fiction, take a look at Joe Scalzi's Starter Villain. I came across this book because I was looking at a few lists on some of the best science fiction novels of 2023, and Scalzi's name jumped right out at me. See, I had just had his book Old Man's War listed on our best military sci-fi books, and so when I saw that he had something as current as 2023, I jumped at the chance to read it. Now, this book is nothing like Old Man's War, as you would expect. Starter Villain is a lot of fun. It's humorous sci-fi. It starts off with this really funny premise. The main character is kind of a down-on-his-luck journalist who's working as a substitute teacher just to pay the bills when he finds out that he's the only living blood relative of his estranged uncle. Now, his estranged uncle passes away and leaves the family business to Charlie. Now, Charlie has no idea what his uncle does except in a very distant way, and he comes to find out that his uncle was what they call a villain, very much in the James Bond Dr. Evil sense. So he inherits this business to include a volcanic secret lair, a satellite killing network, and hyper-intelligent animals, and that you get the idea. And so now throughout this book, Charlie has to figure out what kind of villain he wants to be, especially considering how some of his deceased uncle's business partners would rather like to see him dead instead of being a new competitor. So like Swamp Story, it's a lot of fun. It's low threat, meaning you're not going to find your emotions like up and down and up and down. It's a good, solid read. I rate this one 4 stars out of 5 as well. I think you'll really enjoy it if you're looking for something with a sci-fi flavor that, again, will make you laugh. Moving on to 2024. One of D3 Read's upcoming thematic videos is going to be around humor authors. And I wanted to see who was considered some of the best humor writers of 2024. So I did a Google search, and one of the books that popped up was James by Percival Everett. Now, this book caught my attention because it's got, I think, a really fascinating premise. It retells the story of the adventures of Huckleberry Finn, but in this case from the perspective of Jim, the escaped slave who was with Huckleberry Finn, if you remember your classic literature. Now, I was thinking back to The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and I know that there's some scenes in there that were just absolutely hilarious. I actually reread parts of it because I wanted to be familiar with it as I read James, and there are some hilarious parts of this. So I expected James to kind of be along a similar vein. It is not. James does have funny parts to it. That is true. So like Twain, he does deliver humor, but there's so much more to this book. Whatever it gives us in this book is Jim, who is a lot more human, a lot more flesh and blood, and the consequences of his slavery are painted far more starkly than what we get from the perspective of Huckleberry Finn in Mark Twain's book. Like in the book Huckleberry Finn, Jim he becomes an escaped slave because he finds out he's about to be sold. But we're seeing the actual pain that treating humans as property. But we get more of an insight in how such blatant disregard for basic human rights actually affects a human. Jim has a family, he's got a wife, he's got children he's about to be torn away from. So he escapes to try to get to the free states so he could eventually collect enough money to get someone to buy his family and bring them with him. Many of the classic scenes from Huckleberry Finn are recreated in this book, but again, from Jim's perspective, who calls himself James because he doesn't want to be saddled necessarily with a name that was given to him. He's seeking self-agency. He's seeking he's establishing his own identity and rejecting what his former owners had assigned to him. But at some point, the book breaks away from the narrative of Huckleberry Finn and retells the story of James, who essentially writes his own story throughout this. It's really an intense book, extraordinarily well written. It gets emotional, and it actually is thought-provoking for me anyway, in a way that I don't think a book has hit me in quite a long time. I think this book is amazing. 5 stars out of 5. I highly recommend it. And I think you ought to read it if you get a chance. And we're going to wrap this up with the most recently published book that I read, which is Stephen King's You Like It Darker. Stephen King, I think, is just amazing. His skill in storytelling and wordsmithing make him one of the best horror writers out there, and I'd argue one of the best fiction writers in general. Now, I've read a lot of Stephen King over the years, but I've had quite a long hiatus. I think the last book I read fresh off the presses of his was 1999's The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon. So it's been a while. So when I found out Stephen King was publishing a new collection of short stories, I was excited. What a great way to jump back into Stephen King. You Like It Darker is a collection of 12 stories, some of them short stories, some of them novellas. And I can't really go into much as far as what these stories are about without giving away a whole lot, but wow, what a book. I will tell you that it's a collection of some classic kind of ghost stories. There's the macabre, there's some outright gruesome stuff in here, and there's at least one that I wouldn't even classify really as horror, maybe 2 I wouldn't classify as horror, just thought-provoking. I haven't finished the book yet, I'm almost done. I'm currently on a story called Rattlesnakes, and I will tell you this about it. It's actually kind of a sequel to the book Cujo, which I did read long ago. And so that's really neat. And this story is really, really intense. I'm enjoying it so much. I'll also tell you that another one of the novellas in the book is a story called Danny Coughlin's Bad Dream. And I think it is one of my favorite Stephen King stories of all time. So as I wrap up this book, after Rattlesnakes, which I'm almost finished with, there's 2 more novellas to go. Even if those don't stick the landing, I tell you, this book has become a favorite of mine. I give this one 5 out of 5 stars. It is well worth your time. If you're looking for some horror to wrap up your summer and to lead you on into the Halloween season, then I definitely recommend You Like It Darker. So that's it. That's the 4 books I've read recently that kind of don't fit in some of the thematic videos that we're doing. If you read any of these books, let me know what you think about them. Did you like them? Do you have other book that you would recommend? Like, subscribe, and thank you so much for your time today, and have a great day. Keep reading.